Hey, welcome to Reloved Guitars yet again. We've got an orange work surface today because I'm using up an old towel. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant. But it's a weekend, and for a change, in the UK it's stopped being sunny, so we've got a bit of a kind of an onset of rain. Claire and I were due to be sailing today, but we wisely took a rain check in the literal sense, which was a good move because you could see in the week the crappy weather was coming in. So I think we're going to try and make it later in the week when weather picks up again a bit. Anyway, so as a result I've got a bit more time on my hands to do guitar stuff, which is good because then I hopefully catch up a bit. So what we've got here is we've got John's Epiphone Les Paul, and beautiful looking thing in, I guess, what is it, iced tea version, or I don't know what the actual correct name is, but it's a beautiful finish, lovely colour, and kind of everything you'd expect from an Epiphone really. Nice sounding pickups to my ears. They've got pull push pots on the volumes for coil split, and actually a very nice flat D shaped neck, I guess you would call it. That's how you describe a D. If we assume that C is curved and D is up, across and down, then it's a D shape. It is quite flat and low, so it has a really nice playable feel to it. This guitar came to me in absolutely unbelievable packaged condition. John followed the tips in my packing video to perfection, and he sent it down in its case, but went the whole hog to make sure the case itself was packaged like the precious instrument, as if to treat the case as if it were the guitar without any protection around it. So you end up adding a lot of mass to the whole package, but it was beautifully packaged and completely safe, obviously. And also what John has also done is he bought this guitar with the previous owner having put a new bone nut on it, and I think using my ebook, John has adjusted the nut slots, and he's done a brilliant job of it. If anything, it's almost fractionally too low for my liking. Well, actually, that's not true. It's fractionally lower than I would have probably gone at the first fret, but when it's up to full tension, it's great. Works really well. So I'm not going to mess with it, especially not knocking off this new bone device. Now I'm just looking at this. Yeah, the guy shimmed it. It's really hard. He shimmed it. By the way, John, just for your info, I'll take a couple of close-up pics. This cracking in the lacquer is not, I wouldn't say, it's not the result of taking the nut off, I doubt. It looks like the result of the headstock taking a bit of a hit. And there is a tiny little mark on the headstock right at the top. In fact, it's rubbed off, but it's where it's hit the wall or something. So a little bit of paint on the headstock, like the kind of Inspector Clouseau thing going on here. But it's put pressure on the corners of this thing here. It's not really to do with the nut. It's to do with that's the exact point at which the neck and fingerboard tend to split apart if you take a knock on the head. So that's what's happened to it. The nut change is done pretty well, but like I say, if you look really, really closely, he's got a shim of paper underneath the nut. Actually, not just underneath it, completely. Yeah, actually, it's just a little shim of paper underneath, which is quite common, or a piece of plastic or something. It blends in pretty well, but I can just see it. I think it is anyway. Yeah, just there is. You're right too. There is a little bit of lacquer that's come away at that point, which you quite often will get when you try and break a nut away. Particularly these, they sort of sit in a little trough, a little trench. They don't. A lot of the cheaper guitars, maybe actually not. No, I was going to say it's not a universal thing. Sometimes you find that the nut on this kind of guitar sits level with everything else. On some guitars you'll see that the nut slot extends a bit under the lacquer, depending, I don't, maybe it's to do with when they cut it, when they don't, but anyway. So in this case, this would more or less flip out if you tapped it, but you'd want to loosen it and wiggle it rather than bash it out, because it's going to rotate inside of this little lip. It's got that anyway, but it's not enough, I would say. It may cause some little bits of cracking that you see, or that John's observed just on this spot here, but it's not caused these splits here in the corners. That's a stress crack from the headstock being hit, promise you. Anyhow, so we've got this in, and right off, I played it the other night, last night, and I was really impressed with it. So it's brilliantly set up, really. The only issues that, and the reason John sent it down to me really, is that he's measured the frets, or he's checked the frets for absolute levelness, and that some of them have come up as not completely 100% level. Now, one of the things that may be worth repeating or re-stressing at this point is that if you have the action set kind of where you want it, and of course bear in mind there are limits, physical limits anyway, you can't really go much below. At best on an SG you might get away with a millimetre here and a millimetre there, or 1.3 here and 1.0 there, but if it's sort of already in that kind of region, then the unevenness in the frets that you might observe may not be relevant, in that there may be the kind of residual unevenness that you'll find in all struck any guitars, but providing that unevenness is below the level of the action you've chosen, then it's not something worth chasing just for the sake of it, to go, well, click click, it's perfectly level. You only care about the levelness insofar as it interferes with your chosen action. Now this is pretty low, but let's just have a look and see. Okay, it's pretty low, but it's about 1 point. Let's just get this down here. It's just over. Actually, it can go down a bit. So we may find that when we go down to its preferred, or more like its optimum playing action, you may find that we'll start to notice the effects of that unevenness. Right, the high E is interesting. No, actually the high E is technically just over as well, so we can take that down a little tiny bit. And it's there we might find, oh sorry, the other thing I was going to say, at the action that John already had this set at, there was a slight issue with a couple of bends up here. There. So that's choking off completely due to high fret there. That's it'll be a 12-inch radius, so you wouldn't particularly expect it to choke off. So there is a little bit of fret leveling clearly to do there. Let's get a note. Well, let's just make sure we got our target action exactly where I want it first of all. So 1.5 dead on. Let's push it a tiny fraction more than the 1.5. And let's do a quarter turn more than a quarter turn down. Now this is really low. That may be too low. Yeah, it's a bit too low. We don't need to make it impossible. So, the way I recommend doing it is to pick or set your playing action as close to where you want it as possible. Can't hear it over the rain. Rain? What's that? Now, remember the old thing is that there's three primary components you're dealing with when you're talking about playing action. There are other things that affect it, but like condition of frets, like height of frets and so on. But effectively there are three primary components. There is the amount of curvature in the neck, which you can measure by holding down the first and last fret and assessing the gap in the middle between the underside of the string you're holding and the fret. In this case it's probably sub 0.1 millimeters. It's very, very small, which means the neck is almost perfectly flat, almost, but not quite. That's the first thing. So if you're happy with how that plays, which is slapping a little bit, so the point is, there's the first component, which is the curvature, and the argument there is that your neck really does need some curvature in it. It's worth just thinking, it's worth just considering it, that curvature in the neck is about how much room the neck has to spin, sorry, the string has to spin, okay? So if it's tightened up, then you are you're tightened up, it's flattened out. You want to give it a little bit more, you can slack it off, and basically that changes the amount that the truss rod in the neck is counteracting the string pull. So if we release the amount or reduce the amount that the truss rod is fighting against the string pull, it means the string pull wins a bit more and you get more curvature. Now that would, if you did a lot, that should mean, well, let's leave it at this, it means you've got more curvature. More curvature means technically you've got a little bit more room for the string to spin wherever you're striking it. Now of course, in a way, you could say, well, it only really applies, does it apply everywhere? Well, it does a little bit. If you think about this being a curve, if you fret there, then the next one in the curve, if it's flat, there's going to be hardly any clearance. If it's a big curve, you're going to get more clearance between that and that one, even if it's on this part, i.e. the bit where to us it looks like it's rising up the curve again. You're still going to have a greater clearance than if it was dead flat, counterintuitively. But what you want is more than nothing, right? And so if you have nothing, well, think about it this way: if you have the opposite of curvature, i.e. your fingerboard is like that, then for any averagely low action, the fact is you're going to fret here and it's going to hit the frets here because there's a hump, there's a hill in the middle, so you'll find straight away you can't play it. If it's flat, you'll find you can play it, but with a similarly low action you may find the strings are rotating and hitting the frets. If you add more curvature, which I could do, well, if it depends on whether this is a two-way truss rod or not. It probably is, being an Epiphone. But if you add loads more curvature in the neck, i.e. reducing the amount that the truss rod is countering, I think it's a double action, yes it is. Okay, so you can feel it start to bite in the other direction. So if you change it quite a bit, then what you'll get is bigger curve, and you'll find for the same playing action, as it kicks in, you'll lose some of that zzz with the strings striking the next fret. Now this is quite a subtle difference. You can mistake, when you have an almost flat neck and a very low playing action together, you can mistake the strings slapping in their process of rotation. It can be either because the neck is really flat and it's got nowhere to spin and it's hitting the next fret, or it also can be caused by the fact that the next fret might be really high or uneven. But you can't assume that it's uneven frets, because if you do, let's say we had a low action here, which we've got, let's say we had a dead flat neck, which we no longer have. I've increased the distance quite considerably. But let's say it was dead flat, and you hear this, can't really hear it so much now, Right, it's taken away most of that slap, but let's say we could hear that slap. If you mistake that for uneven frets, you will keep on leveling forever, chasing something that actually won't change because it's not uneven frets. It's a lack of room for the strings to rotate, and they just don't have enough room to clear that first or second fret. I mean, they're hitting usually the first fret after either the nut in this case, or a capo, or a fretted note. So it's why your guitar really, unless you've got, let me think, I'm trying to think, is it tighter strings that don't spin as much, which would probably be heavier gauge strings, unless you've got really heavy gauge strings and you've got ultra, as it happens, ultra flat and even, not flat, ultra even frets, you'll get away with a flatter board and the low action. So those things all have to combine together, but ultimately there'll come a point where your strings, for the low action you've chosen, just have no clearance here to miss the frets, even if the frets are 100% level. So that's the really important thing to know. And maybe John, thinking about the ebook and the work you've done on your other guitar, which John told me he'd worked on the guitar and improved it using that method, which is great, but it may be an area that needs further, or I need to stress in a kind of reissue. I've got a file on my desktop at the moment with sort of edits and amendments that come out of real life things that people have suggested, including one of the things also that's come up, and I think John also mentioned it in his email, is that whole issue of sometimes you can feel like you're going too far, which can frighten people. And in fact, one of the things I've had to explain to a few people over the years is that it's almost by default, you will feel like you've gone too far on fret leveling. Now sometimes, of course, caveat is, of course, you can wear away with your 400 grit or your 220 or whatever, and you can wear your frets out completely. So of course you can literally go too far. But it's a common experience when you first start leveling with a curved beam, that you can feel like you've gone further than you have, and you tend to be more cautious, and you tend to be more easily shocked by what appears to be the amount of wear on the frets. So I'm not saying you, caveat number one, you can destroy your frets doing this completely, yes. Caveat number two is, or experience number two, observation number two, is that most people, including myself, overestimate the damage we've done, the wear we've put on the frets. So it's a tendency, it's quite a common tendency. Now what I've done, this is actually now cleaned that up. Still a little bit of buzz there. Now in this, but that could be a fret thing. Now let's see whether, by the way, if changing the relief, right, changing the relief doesn't take care of this uneven fret thing here. Now those two strings are both choking out a bit on this fret here, and that, without even bending the G, it's that fret at that point is causing the G to just slightly zizz anyway. It causes the B to zizz as soon as it hits the same spot in the same track, and likewise with the E. So that's going to be a fret issue. Now, having changed the curvature of this a little bit, we've probably also increased just a fraction the amount of space available under the first fret, which has eased off, almost completely got rid of actually any of the slight touching that we were getting there. So I would be tempted on this guitar to start with this much clearance and work backwards, if anything, from that, right? So I would say first thing, John, is it didn't suit it to have such a flat neck. That was sub 0.1, so it was half of a tenth, a 20th. So half of a tenth, yeah, it must be a 20th of a millimeter or something. You know, it was almost flat, and that for the reasons I've explained is going to cause you string slap, which is different from fret buzz. So the good thing about leveling on a curve is even if you wanted to tweak it a bit flatter again, you can do all your fret leveling at this setting. So we go this height here, that curvature, which is now, you know, just to assess it with the eyeball. We could get a load of gauges out, but with the eyeball we've gone from, I would say, 20th to about 0.25 or 0.3 max of a millimetre. It's not even that, actually, it's about 0.25 of a millimetre. So that's a quite substantial change as far as the guitar is concerned, but it will clean up a lot of the notes. Now if we do our fret leveling with that curve, remember, because the tool is adjustable to the same curve, it's fine. We can do the relative fret leveling, and then if we want to eke out a little bit flatter, we can keep going and assess it and take it back to maybe 0.15 or 0.2. But I think it's good to remove any of that fret slap as opposed to fret buzz. Now we're going to be almost exactly at the same playing action at the far end here. It'll hardly change that. This is still showing up as 1.5, maybe a fraction over. So because it's a curve, you will get a tiny adjustment happen to all of these things. They're all interrelated. That's the important thing to keep in mind. You know, if you adjust one, it has a knock-on effect on the other. That's about right. So you can hit that a lot harder than you could hit it before. I was getting some clattering down that end. Okay, so that's low. That's set where I want it for now, and the first fret action now is a little bit better than it was, and it is pretty spot on now for playing. So the next thing I would be looking to do is to cure what we know is a problem up here, right? So it's it's a bunch of frets up here. Now this, funnily enough, is the area of the guitar, the neck, where the neck goes from being its thin profile up to being at least twice as thick by the time it reaches here. So it doubles in thickness, and then it gets locked into a wall of mahogany glued in on at least one side and the back side. So this thing stiffens up from, I would say, here onwards. Now that means you have the truss rod, which runs up to about here. I think I can't remember on one of these, but it's beyond this point anyway. So what you have is you have a curve that runs up to about there, and then it comes up and meets a sort of relatively stiff flat spot. So imagine a handle of a scythe or a sickle and the curved blade. That's how I imagine it. And the bit where the handle joins the blade, if you think about it, there's no way, apart from putting a curve in it, there's no way you get away with the fact there's, as far as a snapshot of any part of the curve is concerned, it's no longer a linear curve. There's a knuckle or a joint happening around about there, and that's what's causing this. And it does it on pretty much every single Les Paul you'll ever imagine, except, by the way, for those with bolt-on necks, and they tend to be much less gunged up. So this is a very common experience. Lots of people, and I speak about this not from experience because I haven't done this, a lot of people remove or try to adjust this by what they call fall away, which I think works from about the 12th fret, and their idea is if you look at it, I don't quite know, if you look at it this way, they tend to try and file a backward slope from that point onwards, and I suppose its purpose is to somehow reduce or take down this knuckle here, but I don't know this well enough because I haven't ever had to do it, which is a luxury I'll explain in a minute, but as far as I can understand, having not done it, it strikes me as a little bit destructive in that you're kind of scraping everything further backwards. So you're saying, well, heck, I don't care if this is really low so long as it's lower than that, and I don't care if this is low so long as it's lower than that, and so on and so on. So it's quite destructive and costly of fret metal. But it's called fall away. Now, the method I use, using the tunable truss rod sanding tool, works in this area, and I've done it hundreds of times, and it seems to work. The only theory I can sort of apply to it, let's show you what, oh shit, I've just torn me a bit of paper. Hang on, I need this for my Rickard supplied wiring diagram. My in-house friend of Reloved Guitars, Rickard, who corrects all my crappy wiring for me. He's come up with a brilliant wiring diagram for Q's Cosmos, so I'm going to follow that later on. But just that's 12 string. Don't need that. That was for Adams. Right. So just as a sort of an example. So if you think about it, you've got this very slight curved neck meets the fixed area here. So we know that the neck thickens up at this point and then it gets locked into a wall of granite. So we just know that what that means is when you adjust the truss rod, it tries to adjust all the way along its length, but it really has less of effect here, more effect here. So this is the sort of what I call the blade part, and it joins the handle there. By definition, they're two different shapes. Right, let's get rid of that. We don't need that. But you understand what I'm pointing at. And it doesn't take too much to see straight away that what you really want to do is, if you're trying to get a curve between this point and this point, right, your curve is ideally wants to go kind of like this. Now it's a bit extreme, okay, but that's your one single linear curve all the way along, right? That, by the way, just you might even be able to see that if you haven't heard any of my videos before. That is why an SG is so good for setting up, because the SGs, almost the entire length of the, well, in fact the entire length of the fingerboard is outside of the body of the guitar. So the constraining aspect of the body on the SG neck starts there, which is practically, or if not past the end of the neck. Same with the Les Paul double cut, particularly the vintage ones with the neck sticking right the way out. So then you have here, you have the sort of the Les Paul thing. Now with so in terms of, this is the worst, because on the Les Paul not only does it get 2 times thickness, but it also is glued on two sides to a very solid object. The SG is absolutely perfect because it doesn't have any of that. Any of the glued stuff is beyond the fingerboard. Now in the middle of effectiveness kind of lives the Strat, the bolt-on neck generally. Okay, and the reason that seems to be much better is that it's only held from one side. There is a bit of sideways touching, but it's not glued or locked in place. So you still, there's, you know, the bolting still, you know, keeps a bit rigid, but it's you know, in terms of the scale of effect, it's kind of in the middle. Right, get what I mean? The bolt-on neck. So I've set up loads of vintage V100s that have the LP shape but bolt-on neck, and they kind of, they're in the sort of not too bad to set up department. The SG is your ultimate, it's brilliant, and your Les Paul or similar is always hard work. And it just happens to mean that I have to tell you, with an SG I always regularly get a 1mm last fret action. Here Les Paul, you kind of, if you're getting 1.5mm last fret action on the low E, you're lucky. Strats tend to be somewhere in between. An additional factor in here is neck radius, by the way. The great thing about this is that it's 12-inch radius or above, same with the Les Paul, but as soon as you have a 9.5 or 7.25 radius on a Strat, then its adjustability sort of heads in that direction and it becomes the same as these, or worse, for low actions. But there you go. So that 12-inch SG for this reason, and for the fact that it's a 12-inch radius, which is friendly to bends. They are great guitars to set up, and you can get a 1mm action out of a junk made in Japan 1970s Columbus-y type thing. Providing you do the same fret leveling stuff, that's required to make it play well. So this problem here, as I say, lots of people seem to do the fall away thing, where they sort of, I don't know what they do exactly, they kind of go like that or something backwards to try and minimize this knuckle area here. But what the adjustable truss rod tends to do is, if you think about it, it maps a curve. It maps an approximate curve, actually. It's quite clever. Because that's too much info really, but because we map it with one measurement point there, one measurement point there, and one about there, this puts another curve onto this that looks more like that. So it's actually slightly less smooth an overall curve than the green line, which is the ideal SG curve. But actually what it is it's a sort of compromise between the SG curve and the LP curve, and it does this. It chops off very, very, I mean, we're talking tiny fractions of a millimeter, but I call it the way I describe it is it scoops, as part of its natural curve, it scoops out the troublesome area of this knuckle, and actually what it leaves you with, it doesn't look as bad as that at all, but what it leaves you with is a curve. Well, you end up with this curve, and then the string sits above that curve. Don't make the mistake of think these lines are strings. They're not. They're the shape of the neck, or the shape of a line drawn across all the frets. So yeah, it's a really clever little method. I've found it by accident, thanks to the guy who invented the Katana fret leveling file, the adjustable fret leveling file, which for various bizarre customer service related reasons I end up not being able to use despite having bought one. Anyway, there's a story of that somewhere else, but I won't go into it. But the point is, I had to do, once you've figured out that way is good for the reasons the reasons it benefits, then you can't go backwards. So I couldn't use his thing, even though I've got it here. It's still left here, look, unused. You never see it in my videos because I never use it. That cost me about $140. He fell out with me, despite me praising it and saying how wonderful I thought it was. He didn't like how I described it, or the fact I showed it in my videos. Anyway, long story short, after a load of incredibly outrageous behaviour, he threw my money back at me and left me with this, which I don't use. So there you go. How about that? It's there in the Hall of Shame. It actually stands as a testament to insanely bad customer service. But anyway, so still needing to do the same job because of the reasons I've just shown you, and a bunch of other benefits. I needed to do the same thing, so I improvised my own, which cost £0 and 00 pence to do. And John knows that stuff. This is for everyone else, John, but John already knows that because he's tried the method himself. Okay, so there's just a couple of other things here. I note, my detective brain notes, I haven't got my close-up camera. My detective brain notes quite a bit of graphite in these nut slots, and that's John's work to get them to the right height, which is great. What I would say is they're unnecessarily deep, and as soon as they're any depth, they do run the risk of grabbing the strings. So one of the things that you can do to alleviate that is to reshape the nut. Now, you might like the fact that it sort of looks like it's straight out of the box or straight out of the factory, but if it compromises your tuning, then, or causes you any tuning instability, then there's no point. And my advice is always get the tuning completely stable without using graphite. I've got graphite here, tons of it actually. Don't know why I've got so much, but you know, if you see graphite in here, it tells me that it's still grabbing, and it will continue to do that. One of the other reasons this wouldn't be tuning stable, and John, I don't know how long it was before you put these strings on, there was tons of slack left in the strings, so I was able to, I'll probably still find it actually, tune it up. Right, there you go, these two. Okay, and I've done this already in the house. Okay, that ability to pull these out of tune is going to continually leach out tuning over the time you play it. That coupled with the sticky nut slots will just be a misery of tuning. So you've got to get both those things right. And this, judging by this, it's still clearly requiring lubricant. So I think what we need to do with this, and it's quite simple, relatively simple. Take out the string. We're going to need to take the string out in order to get to the frets to mark them up for fret leveling. Now I'm just going to take them out and just have a look, and I can see sort of residue of pencil actually by the looks of it. So what I would suggest is just to kick off with, if I can even find it, that's a knackered one. Where do I put these things? I've lost my brand new good one. This is the kind of thing I need all the time, and I've made it invisible. Well, not that one. And there's a bunch that I don't need knocking about. Well, there's one, but it's not the right one. So I have actually lost the brand new one. Anyway, so what I tend to do is I tend to get my what's it file, and I tend to just kind of allow it to just open up the sides of the slot a little bit, you know, just to make sure. And this pretty much, these already look done on the base side, but it's starting to look a little bit tight or a little bit deep over here. But I didn't notice anything pinging. So for example, I don't think they're too bad, but there's definitely a lot of slack coming out which needs to be got rid of. Now with these little first, second, third strings, whatever they're called, they're quite deep, and actually they just really could benefit from being opened out. Now you have to obviously try and do it in a way that doesn't immediately alter the depth of the slot. So I'm just going to trying to alleviate that a little bit. And actually, judging by probably the simplest way to take care of this now is judging by the height of this. I think this would be better served now by taking some material off here. As I say, it changes slightly the look of the nut. We'll stand by for a noise. But what it will do is it will free up the strings that are being held down below in the slot. Now this new bone stuff behaves differently from bone, so I'm being cautious. It's not my normal material. So I'm just keeping a bit of the sort of this original style curve, but also seeking to take down. And if you want to, you can bring another file into the game, and that sort of helps you smooth off. And you can keep a good close eye, whichever way you want to do it. But you can keep a good close eye on the depth of the slots, because obviously you've got to have enough for the string to sit in there. You don't want it flying out all of a sudden. But again, you don't want tons of depth for the string to get buried in, because that doesn't help. So that's getting quite, what's the word, light. Now this, by the way, one thing I noticed about this guitar is that the clearance on the first fret is so small that actually when the strings are all off it disappears, or almost disappears, and you start to hear the strings hitting the first fret. But once you tighten it up and put it under load, then the neck obviously changes as well, so it's not as extreme as it looks. So you can afford a bit more on the back side. when you're working with a Dremel near your frets, it goes without saying, be careful. One whack of the frets with your Dremel chuck and you will know about it. You will be spending quite a lot of time either trying to fret level it out or replace the frets, basically. There's not a lot of alternatives. So I tend to, with Dremel, as with everything else, is always try and use wherever possible. Oh, that's good. That's not even glued in. No, I didn't even realise that bit. Okay. Yeah. Wherever possible, use as many hands as you've got to do the job. Right. So that's not glued in, but I don't really want to make any. I don't want to do anything with that because I don't want to add more glue into the mix underneath, because that changes the height of the thing, and it's at a point where I think it's working really well. So it's not critical that we do glue it. It's just I'm aware that it's not glued. Anyway, so next stage in this process is to mark up the tops of these frets, and then we're going to choose our weapon of choice. Now I've got two adjustable files, or bananas as I call them, in a jokey homage to the katana. So I've got a banana. My banana files tend to be one of two. I use the StewMac originated U-channel file, or I use a sort of, I think it's a basic one that I got out of I think it was an Affinity Strat, a standard rod and bar device, which of course only have to go adjust one way. I don't need them being dual action. Now if your nut is loose, by the way, just tighten up the G and the D first, and then the B and the A, otherwise it will tend to want to zip one way or another. So this puts it under enough downwards pressure to hopefully keep it in place. Okay, I'll take another tuning reference note for a minute. These strings here have damaged across there, like it's been leaned against something or bounced off something. Detective. Watching the detective. Right, so basically at this point tuned it up to approximately pitch. Now it doesn't need to be, concert pitch. It just needs to be at its pretty much its working tension. So we've got the right, or very close to the curvature in the neck that we would have it in normal play, and obviously that curvature is going to be adjusted or influenced mainly by the gauge of strings that we've got and the condition of the neck. So we've got 10s on here. Now the first thing I'm going to do is put in my little brass markers, and I'm using the same 3 forever, so they all get the same sort of wear. Now they will wear over time, but they're all wearing at the same rate because I randomly picked them out of the box, and whichever one was kind of the anchor end last week won't be the anchor end. Or last week, what am I talking about? Yesterday or today. Anyway, so what I do is I check to see how that sits, and there's a gap in the middle, so it's not as curved as the actual neck. It's really simple physics, but then I adjust, make a very small adjustment. Sorry John, you know this stuff, this is for other people who haven't seen this. And then I back off a tiny fraction. Now I've got 400 grit paper on here, which is not brand new, but it's not knackered either, so it's going to be a gentle cut. That's now a tiny bit too straight, so a little bit more curve, but it's barely measurable amounts. Well, you can't measure them, you just feel them. Okay, that's that's almost there. So you see how much time I'm taking to get this. See, it's gone too flat again. So it's a minuscule amount. You just have to look at it, and you're on. There you go. We're on the money there. That's as good as I'm going to get it. Careful how you handle the banana, as I call it. Then you take the string off. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will go, hey, that's changed the loading on the neck. Yes, it has. Just slightly. Yes, it's one string down. Okay. But it seems to work pretty well. Now, first thing I do now, and again, I think this will be useful for John as well, because he's done this a couple of times at least, I guess. You'll note what I'm doing is I'm just using this tool pretty much under gravity at this point, and I'm just doing a few swipes up and down to see what it's giving us, what shows up. And straight away we get a kind of diagnostic look. We have cutting a little bit here, touching a little bit there, touching there, not touching there, not touching. So we could go level or high, low, probably level-ish, slightly high, a little bit higher, low, very high, high, exactly as we predicted. Look, right there. Average, a little bit low, average, a little bit low, average, average, low, low. Okay, now for all I know, this may have been done before. Now, the point is this, remember, I don't know, I say remember, you probably don't. When we first played this, and when I played it yesterday, all the notes played on this string. So there wasn't an issue of anything not playing. All those notes played. It's when we bend that string across into the G track that the problem exists. There was a tiny little struggle there, sorry, there, on the 12th fret, just before that really high fret. So it won't hurt me to do a tiny bit more leveling just on that point. Well, do it all at the same time, but just with that point in mind. Okay. But even though we're not really expecting right, let's put it another way. The unevenness that is showing up here, particularly on the 13th fret, is not hindering the high E string from playing, but we know that by the time that high E string bends up to here, this same high fret is definitely getting in the way of both the B and the G fret being bent, strings being bent. So it's already told us that what we suspected is correct. That's very uneven, particularly up there. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the same calibration on the next. Now the reason I use the same calibration for the first two tracks is because I tend to calibrate north of the string or away from me, and obviously there isn't a bit of fingerboard away from the top E, so one of them has to be done twice, and it's this one. So I kind of continue and lightly work this up and down. Now obviously you've got to make sure it reaches the end. This, you can see this truss rod isn't as long as the entire fingerboard, so you have to kind of be aware that you're making some contact with all the frets as you go. Okay, so straight away same things happened, pretty much duplicating the pattern. These are low. Now keep in mind that low frets will make the next fret relatively high, so you might be focusing on the high frets here, but actually if you've got something that's been really pressed in hard and lower than all the rest, even by a fraction of a millimeter, it'll make the next ones in line appear high, and actually low frets are the ones that will ultimately dictate what you do. So now we're going to just check, first of all, see all the notes play. Now we've not done the G track, but it's beginning to free up that E bend. Now this time I am going to recalibrate north of the G string with my little brass thingies in place. Now the reason I do this is because surprisingly the actual curvature of the neck can change from side to side as you go across the neck radius. So that looks still good. Drop that to one side. It's still under tension here, but it's not as much tension as, well, not exactly the same as if it was in playing mode. But in my experience, not so much as makes a terrible difference. And again, just sort of running this up and down. Best advice if you're ever going to do this is to practice on a few cheap squires or something that you don't really care too much about. Naturally, it would be the advice anybody would give. Yeah, get your experience built up on something that isn't critical, i.e. not a customer's guitar. You can see this high fret, high number 13, is tracking high all the way across here, so this is definitely sticking up compared to all the others, but we still have one or two that are showing up as low in the whole scheme of things, so they can make it struggle to play down there. Fine, now here's the test. Well, first of all, it didn't play at all. Now it's playing. Still that little bit of a scissoring sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go backwards and I'm going to do the B and the G one more time each. And I'll recalibrate each time because I'm conscious that I can still improve that bend. Now, you remember, getting a big bend on a very low action is a challenge, full stop, because the geometry of the frets tends to always start to get in the way. If the frets are de facto curved in any way, whether it's a very tight curve like a 9.5 or 7.5, 7.25, or a lighter curve, nonetheless you're pushing uphill basically. There's just no way around it unless it's completely flat, which it almost never is. So by definition, when you're bending a string across a fretboard, you're pushing the fretted point uphill and your anchor points are downhill at the bottom of the hill and you're pushing up the hill, and that means you're not just going away to a point over here, right, which gives you X amount of clearance over that fret. Your string is going away and downwards to a lower anchor point, which means it cancels out that clearance, and the tighter that is, the further down the anchor points are. You get my drift, baby. It's only, this took quite a few setups to work out, but it's what comes with experience and repetition and keeping a very close eye on the results and thinking it through and working it all out. Work it on out, work it on out. You look so fine, look so fine. Twist a little closer now, twist a little closer, let me know. Yeah, anyway. So, it is the great thing about doing it lots of times and then kind of working out why it's doing what it's doing. And also, so in this there's a judgment call of saying, am I comfortable doing another repeat on both these two strings? Yes, there's the answer. I'm calibrating each time. I'm doing a very light fret leveling. I'm not pushing, I'm not grinding away, and I can see and evaluate all the way. Not only can I see and evaluate with my eyes, but also the great thing about this method is I can replace the string under the same correct playing tension and then try out. And the idea is I stop doing any further leveling at the point which I've arrived at the playing action I want. By that I mean this. Now that's bending over, that's going past the top of the hill, so it can't possibly play because it's actually going down the other side. So there's a, you can imagine the limitations of going up the hill to the middle and then going down the other side, and your string is kind of trying to bend itself over the curve and down the other side to its anchor point. Of course, it's never going to do it. Right, I'm happy with that at this point, and I'm going to now move on to the D and continue. Because what I also know is that in sanding these frets out, I'm also going to remove another tiny fraction of metal, which is going to very slightly, if I can get my finger under here, very slightly improve, clean up any final remaining zizzings. But it is, as you saw at the beginning, we've set this up with a very low target action, and that's the good thing about this method, is you're leveling to a target playing action. When you do it with the other methods that involve radius blocks and stringless necks, or fret leveling files on flat necks and so on, you are leveling to an arbitrary target of levelness, which is what you're hoping is you're getting an empirical, completely level, which you then check with your fret rocker and go, look, there are no rockings, therefore it is perfectly level, and you'd stop. But this is aimed at only removing as much metal from the frets as is required to make it play at the action that you're going to play it at, which as you see, I start off by setting quite punitively low. But if we can make it play at that, there's no point going beyond that, because I wouldn't recommend you dropping down to a millimetre playing action on a guitar like this. It wouldn't play very well, be a bit too far. For the reasons I've described about the limitations of the neck construction as well as anything else. So I can see that this high 12th fret has continued all the way across as expected. A little bit less now over this side, so it was higher on one side than the other. So it could be some limitation of how it was pressed in. Okay, and now finally the E. So this is a very interesting one, because it's a very mild improvement. I mean, mild, it'll clean up those bends. It's lowered the action very slightly, so I'm sure John will notice that, because reductions in the actions, in the playing action, can feel quite significant. But it's also, for now, it's also changed the added a little bit more relief in to cancel out some of the tendency to string slap. And like I said earlier on, it's one of the things that I think you have to distinguish over time. You have to gain the experience to be able to separate string slap caused by too flat a fretboard mixing with a low action, versus fret buzz, which is an intrusive and uneven fret in a sequence of frets, or a low one causing the next one to appear relatively high. Be a little careful on the edges here so you don't kind of fall off and slam the tool into everything, which I regularly do. Okay, so the stage after this will be to shape the frets. Nice, happy with that. So at that point, the banana, Los Bananeros, goes back up into its lofty layer, and these here strings come off. They can go into sort of sacrificial string mode, and the rest of the guitar needs a bit of a clean. And I may just now at this point tack the nut down with a tiny little bit of glue, as thin a layer as possible, I would hope. John was asking about the quality of the pickups in these versus, you know, is it worth upgrading? And interestingly, it's the same question, similar question that Paul was asking me in reference to his Les Paul Black Beauty, which I'm completely rewiring and refurbing. And I have to say, personally, with these Epiphones, I'm quite impressed with. And I preface this every time with I am no way and by no means am I a pickup connoisseur at all. I just have a subjective take on it, and that's a lot. But from a subjective point of view, I find I like these Epiphone pickups, the tone that they have, and I'm not sure whether they need, demand, warrant changing out. I mean, you know, if you have a preference for something of the tone that you get from Seymour Duncan's or Bare Knuckles or whatever, then of course, you know, you put them on your guitars because you have experience and you like that tone. If you don't have a particular preference and the question is this tone as good as it can be, then it's difficult to give an answer. All I can say is that in my experience, the tone on these pickups is very enjoyable to use. I've not had any problems with it. So, and then the question really becomes, if you're looking to try and improve your tone, but like anyone else, you're on a budget. And if you're not on a budget, stick the best pickup money can buy in it, because every logical test or experiment or assessment shows that the single biggest place to improve your tone is in the pickups, followed by the electrics, followed by how you play, followed by blah, you know. But the point is, everybody agrees, invest money in your pickups if you're going to spend money at all. This is not moving. I'm going to leave that where it is. Yeah, so spend money on pickups, and if you spend a ton of money and then you want to change the guitar around, then you're free to do it, because you can always take the pickups with you anyway, so you never lose. If you like them and you're in, you know, times that money's hard to come by, then you just take them with you and sell the guitar with its original pickups back in. They're still highly saleable, resaleable, with the original stuff in. Anyway, so that's one of my usual nicely concise, not long-winded ways of saying I think these are pretty good, the Epiphones, and I wouldn't rush to spend a couple of £100 more to upgrade them, unless you had a particular tone preference that you knew you would get, that you were looking for, that you knew you would get from a particular brand or type, and that's obviously a very good reason to change and upgrade them. But if it's all things being equal, then these are pretty good, and they are. I find them, I have to say, to my liking, they are repeatedly better, to my taste, subjective, than, for example, the Wilkinsons that come on the V100s, that kind of stuff. So again, mostly personal preference. But if they're, if advice is in any way useful, then I say stick with the Epiphones, unless you've got a very specific tone that you want, that you know you can get from somewhere else, and in which case spend as much as you've got, because you will never waste money on pickups, because you can always take them with you. So that's my sort of standard advice, really. And I guess it's a funny thing, because quite often I'll pick up a guitar. There's a couple of guitars I've made in the house that I've put Wilkinson pickups in, and every time I'll pick it up and play one of those guitars, I'll be freshly impressed by how good those pickups actually are for such a budget price. So I keep getting surprised. But then there, you know, just to prove I'm not a complete like everything, you know, fool who likes everything, I did try playing some my refurbished BC Rich Warlock the other day with its original BC Rich pickups in. When I finished it, I put them back in and had a look and see if they, you know, were they as bad as some people online had said. And I guess there's a bit of leading the witness already there, but they did sound awful. I took them out to a jam and I just put the guitar down straight away and played something else instead. So that's a pretty good indicator when something sounds horrible enough to want to put down and avoid. I think it's a very good indicator. That's probably the best. Anyway, but yeah, these Epiphones seem to be pretty good. I do like the Rally brand for its Les Paul copies, the GL300s. By the way, what I'm doing is I'm just saving myself some time later on. I know it's costing you watching time if you're watching this, but if you're the kind of person who's watching this, then you are not the kind of person who's arrived here looking for a short infomercial on 30 seconds of jump cuts on how to improve your Epiphone, because you don't get that here. And I had to explain this to somebody the other day in the nicest possible way. The reason you don't get that is because I'm not first and foremost making these videos for you. In fact, I'm making this video for John, first and foremost. Second person I'm making this video for, oh by the way, first person I'm making it for is John, so he can see what I've done. And actually, I don't mind either way, whether John watches this or gives up after 10 minutes. It doesn't hurt me or offend me or bother me either way. I don't win or lose anything for John watching it or not watching it. Only insofar as you know, I'm happy that or I'd like to feel that he was comfortable with what I did with his guitar and how I went about it. But the point is, with John, you wouldn't have sent it to me had you not been. That's the first thing. So really, it doesn't, in the nicest way, it doesn't matter if John gets a nice guitar back that plays the way he likes and then never watches his video. I don't care. Second person I make this video for is someone like John before they've sent me the guitar, who's got one and thinking, who would I trust to do my guitar? And then if you're the kind of person who wants to feel confident in somebody, actually short, jumpy, ding, it's all done, no mistakes videos are probably the opposite of what you're looking for, because it doesn't give you any sense of confidence and faith in the person you're watching. So, but that's the only other person I'm really making the video for expressly. And if you're anyone else and you find anything about it useful, then it's great. And I'll equally have no problem if you switch it off and jump to another video or go somewhere else or never watch it, because I'm not making it first and foremost for your approval or to be liked or thumbs up or anything. It's not part of it, just doesn't even feature in my business methodology. So it's quite difficult for people who don't know how and why these videos work for me. It's quite amusing and slightly infuriating at times that when someone like that arrives on YouTube and they come with an unconscious view frame, which they'll never question unless someone like me challenges them, but even then they won't. But they arrive here with this unconscious view frame that basically asserts that because I am looking for a video on tips on how to set up my Epiphone, it therefore means this guy has made a video that should appeal to my my need to see a quick snappy video on how an Epiphone is set up. And then when they find that, thank you, this video isn't that, then they get really shitty and they write some really abusive comment, usually designed to try and, nothing else but trying to make somebody else, me, feel small or bad about it. And then they go away having shown how great they are. And it's funny because they keep doing it, not often, but once in a while they keep doing it, and I keep, usually, if they're really offensive or abusive, I just hide them from the channel so that they never notice that nobody else can see them, or I can't see them anymore. But sometimes I take the time to make the points I've just made, because I think it's really important, you know, that the world will never be a better place if people still insist on approaching everything with the arrogance of assuming that it was made for them, and the arrogance and the stupidity of not even starting with a more curious perspective, which is, wow, this guy's made this stuff this way. Maybe before I tell him he's a complete idiot and doesn't know how to edit, maybe I'll just start by saying, hey, how does this work for you? I'm interested. But they're not really interested, are they? Because most people, all they're interested in doing is getting a quick hit so they can feel better about themselves, sadly. And that's what seems to be a bit predominant and prevalent on social media. But anyway, for those of you who kind of get what I'm doing, that's a bit of an explanation of why it is the way it is, but also why it's not going to change, because it works perfectly well for me the way it is. And there are a trillion short and snappy edited how-to videos with great music and, you know, speed ups and lots of cool graphics and stuff for you to watch if that's your thing, and that's great. But that's it's not me. But it is, when you see it as many times as I have over the years, and actually it doesn't bother me at all anymore. For about the first few months it used to bother me. I couldn't understand why people were so destructive. But anyway, it doesn't bother me. And now I'm just interested in how people, how arrogant, and I'm going to use an expression here that actually I learned from a colleague of mine in the corporate world, who's a very interesting lady. And I don't suppose she'd ever imagined she would get mentioned in a guitar video that I did, but her name's Caitlin Walker, and she works in an area of communication called clean language. And well, I don't go along with all of its ways of doing things. One of the key concepts in it, which I really respect and value, is that it's all about developing the maturity and awareness, I suppose you could say simply, to move from contempt to curiosity. And the first part about that is beginning to, or raising awareness in ourselves as individuals of just how often our interaction with things and communication about things is in fact contemptuous, trying to feel better than, you know, and trying to score points, rather than curious, which is a much more open and constructive position to come from. And you know, as you probably didn't take half a brain to know, you can imagine the world would be a much better place if, instead of being contemptuous, we were curious of differences and how things are and why they are the way they are for people who aren't us. Anyway, long blah blah blah. But the point is, I really value what she did, and I learned the concept of from contempt to curiosity. You know, I got a lot from her in terms of that concept, and I think it's really central to all of this social media-y stuff. It's central to life generally and everything, but it's never been more foregrounded as it is in social media, and that's exactly what the occasional people who come on my channel and tell me what an idiot he spends. You know, I came here for learn 5 minutes of Epiphone setup, and this idiot spent 30 minutes taping something up. You know, and when somebody's doing that, they are absolutely unconsciously running on contempt, because they've long since lost the vulnerability and the ability to be curious as we were when we were kids, right? You know, so, and I just think it's such an amazing thing to be so trapped in that unconscious perspective that you can't do it any other way. And the reason I say that is because I was like that, and still am sometimes, you know. But the point is, I was like that until I became more conscious of it, and I totally understand how it feels like it pays off. You know, I can definitely. Oh, that's not going to work, is it? Too many things. I can definitely recall the payoff that I would get from turning up on somebody's guitar site and you know, telling them, you haven't even got your intonation set properly, you muppet. That's what I would be secretly thinking, and then I'd try and put it in some sort of pseudo polite way that didn't come across as such a prat. And of course, really all I was being was a prat, full stop, because I was in any moment that I'm trying to feel smarter because I spotted something you didn't or whatever. And I can tell you, even this morning, you know, that's why I used that example. I saw some guy had built a guitar on one of these guitar sharing, you know, modding platform Facebook pages, and you know, this chap showed this pretty guitar, nice colour and whatever, and he just put it together, and he said it plays beautifully, absolutely like butter, blah 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 blah. And I looked at it and I thought, well, you've never heard of intonation, because your intonation is in a flat line, and so that guitar can't, by the laws of physics, that guitar cannot play in tune all the way up the neck. So you either don't notice or you don't care. And then the second thing is, I thought it can't play brilliantly because the top E is about a centimetre in to the fingerboard, and the low E is falling off the edge, so that won't play very nicely either. And my contemptuous side was saying, so you don't even know about using the neck box to align the neck. And that's me in contemptuous mode. And I was going to say something, and then what happens is I sort of catch myself knowing that I'm being contemptuous, and I'm thinking, well, how do you tell the guy this without showboating or grandstanding? And I have to say, I didn't actually come to an answer of that, because although I recognised that it was too easy to be contemptuous, trying to score points on this guy who really all I was trying to prove is that he couldn't possibly know that it was good to play if he didn't know how to set it up, blah blah blah. And I didn't write anything because actually I didn't trust my motivation 100%. You know, so even knowing what I know about clean communication doesn't mean it's not hugely tempting to still come from a position of contempt instead of curiosity. And when I do perform best in that mode, what I try to do is try to find a generous place to come from, to ask. And if I can't ask about something, if I can't find something to be curious about, then if I'm going to give advice, then to give it cleanly, and without the contempt part of it. So giving it generously, you know, in order to improve. I can't see what I'm doing. Improve something for that guy, you know. So instead of saying, you know, asking him a trick question to try and set him up to show he doesn't know how a guitar is intonated, just ask him, had he tried intonating it? Or a genuine question was, have you found that that's intonated like that, or is that yet to be intonated? You know, a question that's not exactly open, but doesn't assume and doesn't try to score points. And that's really hard to do. Well, it's not that hard to do, but it's hard to remain. It's hard to do if you don't have any awareness that you don't normally do very well at it, or that you're unconscious that your tendency is just to try and make yourself feel better by grandstanding. And everybody who comes and makes those comments on my YouTube page is clearly in that mode, and sometimes you can track them to other channels and they'll do exactly the same thing, and all they want to do is get into fights where they can tell people everyone else in the world is a complete idiot except them. And like I said, if I didn't recognize it so strongly in me, I wouldn't recognize it at all probably. So it's only because I have unconsciously in my time being that same prat, put it mildly, is how I know it. But it's really, you know, it's why I often talk about it on these videos, because it really is an important thing. It's not, you know, people who don't want to delve into the deeper meanings of it, they kind of like to dismiss it and go, oh come on, it's only banter, or yeah, stop being so deep and meaningful about it, or overanalyzing it. But actually it isn't just that, it actually is kind of ties in with everything we do. And I never see anything we do, like guitar making or hobbies or work, nothing's ever separate from how we do everything else in our lives. So I think it is, there's never a point where a comment on YouTube is somehow frivolous because it's only on YouTube. It's not. It's a microcosm of the whole, and I think it's as crucial and as urgent and as significant when somebody arrives on yet another YouTube page and goes into contempt rather than curiosity mode with somebody. I think that's kind of like, that's as important as saving the whole world type of thing. You get the old, what was it? What was his name? You know, Schindler. No, it wasn't Schindler. Well, it's a Islamic quote, isn't it, or something? He who saves one person, although I think that says innocent person, but anyway. But you know, to me, there is nothing small and insignificant. The contempt that people arrive and make abusive YouTube comments is the same contempt that's at war in Syria or the streets of London or wherever there's trouble, you know, and suffering. It's the same stuff. So I don't think it is superficial or fun or light-hearted in any which way. So that's why I talk about it the way I do. And that's why, amongst other things, that's why some people come here and get annoyed, because they want something dished up to them in a way that doesn't challenge them in any way. Thank you. Just give me what I want and I'll be out of here. Well, sorry, this is my shed space, and if I want to talk about stuff that matters to me, I'm going to do it. Well, you get to see a totally boring routine of masking off somebody's Epiphone Les Paul prior to polishing out the frets and making it play lovely jubbly. Right, well, I will in fact save you from watching the fret polishing process, because it's noisy, even noisier than the rain in fact, and it's mucky. So what I'll do is I'll put the radio on and go off camera and do all of that polishing biz, and then when that's done I will come back, probably when this is restrung with 10s, and we will be good to tweak the final setup and check everything. But the nice thing about this method is, if I can just tear this paper, is that once you've done it, you've basically leveled the frets for your chosen playing action, and you can do anything you like. You could, you know, leave the guitar unstrung for 6 months. You could transport it. If it's a bolt-on neck, you could take the neck off and do something else with it. But when you put it all back together again and load it with the same strings, these frets are going to adopt their relative levelness that we had just now, that we arrived at just now, and that's what's great about it. So the precision work is done. We sort of load all of that to the front of the process. Now it's sort of manual labour in a way to do the polishing out, followed by cleaning up and restringing and some oil on the fingerboard. And then after that it's a matter of stretching the strings thoroughly, for the reasons I've already talked about, checking the intonation, and ensuring that the strings move freely through the nut slots and don't need any more widening done. Okay, so I'm going off camera. I'll see you shortly. Just a quick check-in. Done the polishing. Everything's now beautifully polished up, but you can see there's lots of dust everywhere which we have to clean up. Most of it now will come off with the paper. So I've got the radio on in the background. I can't be bothered to stop it since I can't even hear it anyway over the rain. So it's just background noise. Okay, so often you'll get a little bit of glue left behind on these, so you have to be prepared to clean it off where you see it. And they're debating on the radio about policing in the UK. And they've got a former New York cop describing what it was like there. And somebody was just saying that last week in a central London borough there were 10 policemen on duty, police officers on duty I should say, and 30 years ago there would have been 50. That's a bit mad, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going to go and turn the radio off in a second since we're at the fun part. It's funny, it's really hard to hear the radio with the rain coming down. That's my favourite bit, taking this off, taking the gunge with it, and then give it a clean over, and then some oil. Oil mist again. Blimey, it is rainy. So this dust just comes off nice and quickly. It's never a problem. Now I had a mucky old cloth that I was using for oil. Could this be it? And the oil is now peeking around somewhere. Use this stuff. It's all the same. So the oil is good for refreshing the wood, the rosewood, but it also helps to just clear off any last bits of marker pen that are sticking to the side of the frets, right? Andrew Castle. Right. Oh. Somebody shared a link on Facebook the other day of a kind of global radio app, which you could just move around a map and drop in on any foreign radio station that you liked. It's brilliant. Yes, it was great. Kept me busy for at least 10 minutes, but I have to remember to go back and play it some more because it looked like great fun. Right, so just cleaning up any last little finger marks for now. Right, so we need some 10s, rotos. Now, John's put 2 sets of 10s in. He sent some D'Addario NYXL strings. I've not ever used these before, so let's stick these on for him, because they're supposed to be very fancy. And you get a sticker as well. No, I wouldn't do that, I promise you. So, okay. Big ones, small ones, medium ones. Big ones, medium ones, small ones. So these are in side-by-side pairs, which is a little bit different from the rotos, which always come in 1, 3, 2 and 4 sort of thing. Okay, so all the main stuff done. Oh, and we've also got the truss rod cover as well to put on here, which is cool. I'll do that in a minute. So I'll just 1 and 2 side by side, that's right, yes. 1 and 2. So all the good stuff, all the precision stuff done. Now's the nice stuff, putting it back together again. And then I'll go in and get a cup of tea or something, have a break. I've got a resolder of Hugh's Polish, 1970s Polish Cosmos. I've got 2 of them to do for him, but the first one nearing completion. It's a single coil one hanging up over there. So I have to take the strings off, take the plate, hold the gubbins out, and then rewire it according to my new wiring schematic from Ricard in Portugal. Sweden, Portugal. And so that's going to be cool. Now I'm going to suggest that we leave the neck relief where it is on this. So I'm going to put the truss rod cover back on. And the reason I'm suggesting leaving the neck relief, because already it felt right. And I think we have to recognise that when a guitar needs its little bit of rotation room for the strings, it needs its little bit of rotation room, so it has to have it. I don't think there's a great advantage of flattening the neck out completely. As certainly not as much as some people think, and I think what you get from that is you get fret slap, which you then can mistake for fret buzz, and you can run into all kinds of difficulties mistaking the two, and before you know it you can be sort of wearing your frets away, chasing your tail. So I think the principles apply, the basic principles apply. The guitar, there is a truss rod because there is an optimum amount of curvature in the neck. You don't want it too much, which is why there's a truss rod, so that you have a truss rod to counter the curvature that an untrussed neck would suffer at the hands of the string loading. But you also don't want it too curved, so you have that same truss rod allows you to put it where you want it. But the issue is where should it be? And I think to make the decision on that you have to go back to the first principle of what neck relief is for. And neck relief is to allow the string room to spin around when you strike it. And if you strike it hard, you technically will need more neck relief, and if you don't. So again, it's one of those experience-based subjective things that you have to figure out for yourself, really, ultimately. But I would start with a good 0.2 millimeters of relief. Sometimes I see guitars that come in with less, like this one did, and there's no problems at all. You don't even get any string slap for whatever reason. As I said at the beginning, maybe because the frets are already so level that it's just perfect, or maybe it's because something about the neck, it's an SG and it's very responsive to adjustment and it's just right, or whatever. But I would err on the side of having relief and some rather than almost none or none. All that will happen, the more relief you give it, the higher the playing action will feel, mainly towards the middle of the neck, but all over, but in increments towards the middle of the neck. And I've said this millions of times before, it is obviously the case that adjusting your truss rod has an effect of adjusting the action, particularly in the middle of the neck, decreasingly less so either side of that as you go towards the nut or the bridge. But the important thing that some people don't seem to get, and get right confused and stuck about it, is you do not, ideally, you do not go to your truss rod as a primary means of adjusting your playing action. That's where some people get it completely wrong. They think that because a secondary effect of adjusting your truss rod is that it causes a change in the action towards the middle and less towards the end, they think that therefore the truss rod's primary function is for adjusting your playing action, and then you'll get all of these people in forums advising other people to adjust their truss rod if they want to change the playing action. And it isn't the case. The truss rod's first primary function is to counter or allow the curvature of the neck, or to tame the curvature of the neck, any curvature of the neck caused by the string loading. And in doing so, it has that secondary effect of increasing the feel of the playing action in the middle of the fretboard. But you don't go to it as a primary means to adjust your action. You adjust that by your last fret and first fret, which are adjusted by the bridge saddles and the nut slot heights respectively. It's quite important, that distinction, and it is amazing how much that bad or that incorrect advice is given in so-called expert forums. And I say so-called because I don't call myself an expert in anything, but there are some things that I know through reasoning and experience, and so I do them and I explain why I do them, and I recommend that it makes sense. But like everything, you know, I never would suggest you take my word for it. I suggest you evaluate my take on it, my opinion, along with everybody else's, and come to a conclusion that makes sense to you. And if it's the same conclusion I've come to, well, fine, you know, that's how it is. It's not because I said it, it's because it's a logical conclusion. But yeah, it's a little frustrating to see sometimes information that's completely wrong, or demonstrably or experientially proves to be untrue, or not good advice. So it's frustrating to see it, because so many people can take that advice and then find themselves, you know, having a complete set of confusing and uncontrollable results as a consequence of it, and then, you know, give up and get frustrated and whatever. Still, if you believe that out of frustration and misinformation comes personal learning, then it's not a bad thing either. Okay, so my first kind of stretch is just to make sure everything's on, and then I'll go to a simple tuning. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do, or the thing I'm going to do now is take the strings and manually stretch them as much as possible, with simple aim of getting out every bit of residual slack that is going to be the enemy of my enjoyment. And that's the way I like to think about it. When I think about the priorities of a guitar, it may be different for you, but for me the number one priority about a guitar as a musician or somebody who likes melodies and harmonies is that it plays and stays in tune. It can be the crappiest built, lousiest pickup, cheapest thing in the world, and it can look ugly, but if it plays and stays in tune, I'm going to enjoy it, because I don't care about the other things so much. So if that's the first priority to me, getting this bit right and getting the nut slots right are two of the most critical things I can do. And you know, when you watch people talking about their struggles with their £1,500 Gibson or something, you know, that they can't get to stay and play in tune, and it doesn't get picked up and it stays in its box because frankly every time they take it out it frustrates the hell out of them and they just put it away again. And then they go to a forum and then they'll blame any number of things, from the tuners to the, you know, the construction of the position of the tuners to the, you know, something about the wood in the neck or the, you know, blah blah blah. And 99% of the time it comes down to not having done this or a version of this, stretching the strings to get rid of all the slack, and 50% that and 50% nut slots. Just check the action. This may have crept off while I was doing my polishing. It's quite possible. Sometimes you just get a tiny movement in these while you're doing cleaning and it goes off, because this is incredibly small tolerances we're dealing with. So it's just about there, but this has gone low, so yeah, I need to just make an adjustment to that. Yeah, so tiny amounts of adjustment. So after I've done that, I continue to stretch. The E is the one that's always usually going to break doing this, top E, so I have spares knocking around for just such things. The amount of time it takes to stretch this completely out is quite something. Let me just move things a minute. Yeah, it's yeah, you have to really work hard to get all the slack out, and there's no quick way, unfortunately. Some people sort of hope there is. It's like a bit of a holy grail, you know. Can you tune it up sharp, leave it overnight, and then it will be okay? No. I don't know. In the case of this, John had these strings on this for very long, so it wasn't surprising I was able to pull loads of slack out of them. But I've had guitars from people who've had them hanging up for a year or two and played them off and on over that time, and claimed, you know, said they've stretched them and done bits and bobs to them, and I can pull tons of slack out of them still, and they go beautifully out of tune, and that's it. So it can go on for years, and that basically that slack, when it comes out, will cost you in terms of your tuning. You'll just, you know, you'll bend a note when you're playing, and it will go flat in the middle of you trying to play your song on stage or whatever. See this. Interesting. The saddle down there looks higher, a bit higher than the others, but maybe it's right. Where it's sitting, that's good. That's the last bit of the stretchy stuff, is to right, halfway up the hill. Well, I got that one out of it. Using my good test bin, that one. I can only do a tone on that one there. Let's see what happens if we raise it up a tiny fraction. How much it takes to alleviate that. Well, it's 1 point, what is it really? It's 1.1, 1.2 maybe. Still bending out the old bits of slack there, but that's retrieved the that top bend up there. Good, little tiny amendment there, adjustment. I'm so used to push buttons, I don't know what to do with a pull. Amp's probably running out of batteries anyway, but there we go. contrary to what some people coming onto my video channel think, it's not a review of the Epiphone. I look like I'm suffering. It's because I don't normally bend tens or play tens, but okay, I am happy with that. That is good. I like it, I like it, I like it. There we have it. It's done. So the thing's done. Action fractionally lowered. Bends freed up here. Nut slots widened a little bit. Overall nut shape, nut profile taken down a little bit. Relief increased just slightly. Actually, it's hardly any by looking at it now, but enough to avoid any clatter. So there we go, John. Done. Hope if you watched it, I hope you found it interesting. If you didn't watch it, don't leave me a bad message. Well, you won't, because you haven't watched it. And if you aren't going to watch it, go somewhere else and watch something more fun. Life's too short to be running around looking for places to be contemptuous. Look, he's tied it all up to the theme of the episode. Yeah, don't waste your time searching for opportunities to be contemptuous. Move from contempt to curiosity. Hard to say, and even harder to do, but really infinitely rewarding, actually. As a spiritual philosophy, or just a kind of growing up thing to do, you know, instead of stop looking for scoring points on everyone, so you feel a bit better. Because it's a much more interesting world when everyone does things differently. And you're not right all the time. That's even more interesting. Right, I'm going to put this back in its case, and I'm going to take it in the house and going to check it out later on and give it a double check. But the aim will be to pack it back up tomorrow, aided and abetted by John's fantastic packaging, some of which I'll use again. I'll make some new bubble wrap bumpers because I'll keep the other ones for sort of general buffing and packing material. It's much easier than trying to unpick them. Yeah, ready to travel back to John on Monday. And a spare set of strings to go back with it as well. We didn't need those. There we go. Thanks for watching.